Happy Thursday out there, folks. This is Darius Dale here to present our macro minute for Thursday, June 9th, 2022. Starting with markets, we have stocks down, commodities down, crypto down, dollar down, global bond yields up. On the market moving headlines, starting with the ECB, it's hawkish but not draconian. So the ECB intends to raise rates 25 basis points in July after ending QE at the start of next month. Officials also expect to move in September, but a gradual sustained increases after that. Their policy statement suggested that they can opt for a 50 basis point if inflation misbehaves. Economic forecasts published alongside the decision paint a picture of a weaker rebound from the pandemic and inflation pretty much very above target throughout the projection period, which ends in 2024, which crystallizes the central bank's exit from many years of stimulus. It's a little bit on the hawkish / dovish side with respect to the growth outlook being above trend consistently, very above trend inflation. It's telling you that the ECB is comfortable letting the economy run a little bit more hot than certainly, let's say, the Federal Reserve, for instance. Shifting gears, Xi Jinping remains very steadfast in the implementation of China's zero COVID policy. Shanghai is likely to seal. Shanghai is effectively imposing COVID restrictions in 7 of their districts this weekend. They're going to seal one of the districts already after finding 6 COVID results on a city of 28 million people. And if the testing that they're likely to do in the 7 prefectures this weekend, if that comes back in an adverse way, you're likely to see another couple weeks of lockdowns in China. We talked about both the ECB decision and impact on the euro and outlook for the global liquidity cycle in our leadoff morning note. We also talked about China's zero COVID policy and what that likely means for supply chains and inflation and the broader liquidity cycle. If China can't get out of zero COVID, the world's not going to have a sharp disinflation that I think the bulls, the risk asset bulls, are anticipating. Big movers this morning. Germany's DAX down 1.5% on the hawkish move in the ECB. Out of the ECB, it's up 4.4% month over month on the dead cat bounce here. 10-year nominal German Bund yield up 9 basis points to up 31 basis points month over month. So we continue to see that hawkish repricing across the European sovereign debt curve, across European money markets. A little bit more upwardly sloping than the U.S. Money markets and sovereign debt curves at the current juncture. Bloomberg Industrial Metals Index off on this China news, minus 2% to down 1% month over month. Shifting gears to our volatility adjusted momentum signals and probable range processes. U.S. dollar, Bloomberg dollar index that is still bullish VAMs in the middle of its range with 0.8% of downside versus 1.1% of upside. Gold bearish VAMs minus 2.3% of downside with 1.3% of upside. 10-year nominal Treasury yield bullish VAMs towards the upper bound of its probable range with 6 basis points of upside and 24 basis points of downside. High yield OAS neutral VAMs minus 36 basis points of downside versus 31 basis points of upside. S&P 500, that is neutral VAMs. You got 3% of upside with 5.9% of downside. VIX neutral VAMs minus 7% of downside versus 26% of upside. And NASDAQ 100 still bearish VAMs, 0.9% of upside with 9.6% of downside. Russell 2000 neutral VAMs here, minus 7.5% of downside versus 2.5% of upside. Bitcoin is still bearish VAMs, minus 12% of downside with 4% of upside. Ethereum bearish VAMs still, 15% of downside with minus 7 or with plus 7% of upside. Shanghal Composite neutral VAMs finally correcting a little tiny bit off the upper bound of its probable range, 0.6% of upside with 4.7% of downside. Crude oil still bullish, minus 8% of downside, 2% of upside there. So getting a little exhausted. Agricultural neutral VAMs, middle of the range, minus 2.6% of downside versus 3.9% of upside. And then lastly, industrial metals, bearish VAMs correcting off the upper boundary of its probable range with 4% of downside and 2.3% of upside. So with that, Darius Dale presenting our macro minute for Thursday, June 9th, 2022. Best of luck out there today.